So a viewer sent me an email. I'm not going to mention their name, but a viewer sent me an email and they said, Sabby, you have to cover this. Please, there is propaganda that's being spread and you have crossover with Breaking Point. So you really have to tell your viewers the real deal here. And according to my analytics, that is correct. According to my analytics in YouTube Studio, the majority of my viewers, the number one show that they watch is Breaking Point. So there is crossover there. So they told me about this video and I was like, oh Lord, we gotta address some things. Before we get to that clip, I want to show you another clip. I just want to take you back to a moment. Many of you may not remember this, but I do. I want to take you back to what Krystal Ball said 2 months ago on Piers Morgan's show. Listen to this.
There's a lot of cult members. There's a lot of cult members on this panel. Yeah. I mean, one thing I would say to Harry.
Yeah, Dave.
One thing I would say to Harry is, listen, I'm not in the cult. I already wasn't voting for Joe Biden because of the genocide in Gaza. I'm voting for Dr. Jill Stein. However, there were things that I liked about his domestic policy that
Everybody heard that, right? So that was 2 months ago when she was on Piers Morgan and she said that she was voting for Jill Stein because obviously wasn't going to vote for Biden because of the genocide. Krystal has been one of the more vocal people condemning the genocide. She's brought on multiple, scholars to talk about the situation in Israel and also, of course, like the plight of Palestinians. So I will say that she has been one of the more vocal people, not the only one, but she did talk about it quite a bit and talk about her disgust for what was happening there. So when she said that she was voting for Jill Stein, she said it on Piers Morgan's show, and shout out to the person who found this for me earlier today. We're going to go through a timeline after we go through this clip, because when I saw this, I feel like there were things that were said during this discussion that if you're not paying close attention, you may not catch it. And there are certain things that Krystal said during this segment that raised red flags, and we got to talk about that. The crazy part is I found myself agreeing more with Sagar than with Krystal. That's usually not a thing. And this is about them commenting about Jill Stein's appearance on The Breakfast Club. One of the things that Krystal started off saying was that, well, Jill Stein should know the number of members in Congress. It is what it is. I'm not going to push back on that. I've already talked to you guys about that. That's not the issue. The thing that Krystal does in this conversation is she tries to find a way, even when it comes to genocide. I notice when it comes to genocide in this presidential election, she tries to find a way to still kind of walk in the middle so that she doesn't have to take a hard stance against the two-party system and telling people to get out of the two-party system. Let's dive in here.
Trump and Kamala Harris, like Kamala Harris is vice president to Joe Biden, both of them are pro-genocide. So as just like a moral issue, there are certainly a significant number of people, especially Muslim Americans, who just say, I can't support that. I don't care if you are lesser evil, whatever, I just can't support it. And then the other piece that I think is her most compelling argument is like, listen, we, by being out there as a sort of protest party, we have pushed the conversation on this set of issues around.
Oh, hold on, guys. Sometimes, let me move that out the way. Let's try this again.
Sort of protest party, we have pushed the conversation on this set of issues around.
I don't know why it does that, but here we go.
To get back to a little bit of the AOC part, here's part of the bingo game. If you actually give a damn about people you organize, build power and infrastructure and win, Keith Ellison, the Attorney General of Minnesota, also going in on Jill Stein for some reason at this point. He says, if you've ever been annoyed by politicians who only show up at election time, then you've got to be annoyed with Dr. Jill Stein. She claims to be an unconventional alternative, but she's nauseatingly conventional. She shows up every 4 years making lavish promises, but has no record of producing anything except Republican victories, hard pass. And the last thing I'll share with you, which could be a key to why you see, Democratic attacks against Jill Stein, not just from Keith Ellison and AOC, but from others as well at this point in time. Let's put this up on the screen. Polling suggests that she's doing quite well among Muslim American voters. This is from the Council on American Islamic Relations. It shows her, this is Yashar Ali who is tweeting this, shows her getting a solid share of their votes in key battleground states. So in Arizona, you've got Jill Stein actually leading the field among Muslim voters, 35%. Also in Michigan, critically, 40% she's winning among Muslim voters. Pennsylvania.
Pause here for a second, because there's something else that I want to point out that I think is important. So it's not just about Jill leading in Arizona with Muslim voters, in Michigan significantly with Muslim voters, and also in Wisconsin. There was something else I noticed about this poll, which they don't mention here. And although it's not a huge difference, why is Donald Trump beating Kamala Harris among Muslim voters in Nevada and in Michigan? Everybody see that here? He's beating Kamala Harris in Nevada, 27-26, and in Michigan, 18% to 12%. So that's another thing I noticed too.
Pennsylvania, 25%. Wisconsin, 44%. Again, that's another state where she actually leads the field among Muslim voters. So, as a percent of the population, you're talking about a relatively small slice, but small slice could make a difference in some of these key states. Sagar.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know exactly what we were talking about, the motivation here.
Yeah.
Keith Ellison and AOC. I mean, the problem for AOC and Keith Ellison is that they're the exact people who rose up against this party line talk and now are enforcers of it. So in my opinion, you actually have less credibility. So the people who attack Jill Stein, who are just Democratic apparatchiks, I'm like, yeah, that's fair. It's you people believe that the party is the solution to everything. But AOC, went on the DNC stage and said Kamala was working tirelessly for a ceasefire, as in trying to fool Gaza voters into voting for that. I'm like, that's bullshit. You are trying to message to people incorrectly and lie to them. And Jill Stein is telling them the truth. I don't think or at least the truth in the way that they believe it. And that's something that, let's take the election out of it, AOC would probably be on Jill Stein's side if there was no Kamala, there was no Trump, or there was no election. Let's say this was happening in 2021. I'm not so sure that she takes the current posture that she is right now. And the stakes weren't as different on other issues. So that's where I kind of have an issue, where you previously ran against the system, now you're a systemic enforcer, and you're actively using your old image as a revolutionary to go after a Jill Stein and a third party. I think that's wrong. Yeah.
And I was with Sagar on this. I was really surprised. Like I said, I'm usually not in agreement with Sagar, but I thought he was right there.
I think that at this point, I think we need to see AOC has decided that she is going to try to work within the system, right? Yeah. That's her political. She previously had a different political theory of change, which was much more adversarial, and she does not hold that theory of political change anymore. At least she does not act on that theory of political change. So I guess I don't see her that different from any other Democratic Party apparatchik. She is a Democratic Party partisan.
But you and I follow this day to day.
Oh, yeah.
The average person is not going to.
Yeah. I guess what I would say is a few things. Number one, I don't think that this is I don't think this is 4D chess from AOC. I don't think this is an intelligent strategy, because people who have very genuine, extremely legitimate moral concerns about voting for a candidate who supported genocide, if you're just yelling at them and shaming them and how could you, and they're just, Jill Stein's an idiot, et cetera, I don't think that that's an effective pitch. I think you're more likely to harden them against the Democratic Party or harden their commitment to voting Green parties. So
That's true. I agree with her with that. Like, shaming people is not going to change people's minds.
And efficacy, I think it's foolish. There's something about this conversation that I've been thinking about that really kind of drives me crazy on both sides, which for Dr. Jill Stein, like, I understand her position too. She's trying to win votes for the Green Party, and that's her job. And she's going to go out there and make her case and make the most compelling case she can as well. But there's a discourse around this that assumes that there is a good answer to this question, and that's like, there is one answer. Either the right thing to do as a lefty is to vote for Kamala Harris, or the right thing to do as a lefty is to vote for the Green Party. There's a lot of certainty and a lot of like moral outrage around this. And I think it is more likely that there just is no good answer here. Like,
pause. This is the part. So first of all, let's go back. If you're a lefty, vote for Kamala Harris. If you're a lefty, vote for Jill Stein. So let's back up here. First of all, Kamala Harris is not left. So here we go with this again, right? Krystal knows this. We know what left is. Kamala Harris is a corporate, moderate, so-called neocon Democrat. She is bragging about being endorsed by Dick Cheney. She is bragging about getting the approval of Goldman Sachs. She's against Medicare for all. She's against banning fracking. She's not left. So there's that. So I'm not going to sit here and argue and debate over, as a leftist, who you should support if you consider yourself to be a leftist. What I am going to say is this. When she says there's no good answer on this issue, the answer is not to reward genocide. The answer is not to reward genocide. Krystal saying there's no good answer on this issue is a convenient way to not have to publicly take a side when it comes to genocide in this presidential election, to kind of still walk in the middle and make it seem like, well, wait a minute, I know I did tell people that I was voting for Jill Stein, and then Kamala jumped in the race and I got really excited and on board for Kamala. So I better be careful how I say this here, because I don't want people to come back and say, well, you said this and you did this, da 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 da. That's a coward way out. That is a coward way out. You do not reward genocide. So to hear Krystal say there's no one good answer, no good one way on this issue, that's bullshit. You don't want to say that there's a one good way on it, because that would hurt your brand. And we're going to get into that when we go through the timeline. Let's continue. That was cowardly.
You're kind of checkmated. That's how I feel. Like, on the one hand, I think there are a lot of very compelling and troubling reasons why I do not want to see Donald Trump back in the White House. I think those reasons have been on full display over the past number of weeks. I think he would be worse on Israel, even if that is like the narrow lens of your focus. I think there's something powerful in like the French model of this sort of like right-wing coalition, or you could say anti-fascist coalition, that came together to defeat the right-wing party there.
The statement that Donald Trump would be worse on this particular situation is interesting when I hear people say that. Not that I think he would be good on it, because he wouldn't either. But the reality is, Gaza, for the most part, is already flattened. Gaza, for the most part, is already flattened. And I hope people really understand that. Most of the damage has been done by the Biden-Harris administration. Think about that and hold on to that.
But ultimately, also, you're asking people to like do something that is morally very difficult. And
no, it is not morally difficult. It's morally wrong. So let me let it finish.
And that doesn't move you away from the fundamental dynamics of lesser evil voting over, a long period of time. But it also is not clear to me that a vote for the Green Party is any sort of a magic bullet either, like a silver bullet either. Because the point of, look, you have been running this strategy for a number of years and it hasn't disrupted the duopoly. Like, the result of you getting a significant number of votes in 2016 was the Democratic Party crushing the left and moving further to the right. So it's not like that strategy has paid off either.
Now, here is where Krystal is being disingenuous. Why hasn't that strategy paid off? Why doesn't Krystal tell you why that happens? How is that strategy going to pay off when you are blackballed from most of corporate media, when you are prevented from being on the debate stage, when most of the press refuses to cover that you're even running unless they feel like she is now, where she's garnering a lot of support from Muslim voters and it could affect Kamala in the swing state. Why would you leave that out? Why would you just say, well, you've been running this strategy since 2016 and look, it hasn't worked. You've been running a strategy too. You guys that pushed like Justice Democrats, you were pushing that strategy and you were running that strategy for years. And you still was trying to push and push. And in fact, until Marianne Williamson dropped out, you were still running that strategy. So you were doing the same thing. What are you talking about? And the progressive candidates receive more coverage by corporate media than Green Party candidates ever receive. The only reason that you hear much about Jill Stein right now is because of how she's polling with Muslim American voters. So that's important for people to really understand. But notice what she does. She talks about how the genocide is a significant issue to people and it needs to be heard and it's a moral issue. Then she goes to, but you have been running this strategy for years. This is the game that people like Krystal play. Because what Krystal's job is to do is to keep you in the duopoly. Krystal's job in the end is to make sure that both of these parties continue maybe on a different level. She wants some reforms, but at the end of the day, Krystal Ball is never going to tell you to leave the two-party system. And I'll get into that a little bit later when we get to the timeline. That's important for people to really understand. You have to understand how people work and how people move in this space. Jill Stein is the candidate that has the progressive policies, something Krystal Ball has championed for years. But instead of telling people to support the candidate that is against the genocide and has the progressive policy, Krystal Ball is still going to try to keep you in the duopoly. So the way that she does that is she softens the blow by mentioning the genocide and then following up with that by saying, well, they've been doing that strategy with the Green Party since 2016, and it hasn't changed the duopoly. It hasn't disrupted it. We can say the same thing about you. We can say the same thing about the AOCs and all these squad members that you championed for years and you guys told people to go out and volunteer and vote for. We can say the same thing about you were just pushing Marianne Williamson to do the same damn strategy. We can say the same thing. So pay attention to what they do. This is very important. You would never, ever hear me on this show tell you when it comes to genocide in this particular situation, you would never hear me sit up here and tell you there isn't one, correct answer to this issue. The correct answer is to not reward genocide. Do you see the difference between what I just said to you and what she's saying? Let's continue.
So I think in these electoral calculations, in some ways, it's a misplaced focus. The better place to focus is probably on, building a powerful labor movement and those sort of, democratic organizing, because I don't think either one of the answers to the narrow electoral question are particularly the answer or a good answer.
Well, yeah.
Because she's looking at this through the lens of winning, right? So because she don't really want to deal with it, let's pivot to labor, building labor wins and all this kind of stuff, right? The labor movements that still have to coalesce alongside with the Democratic Party in order to be invited to some of the events and in the room. I just spoke with Chris Smalls on RBN. JB and I just interviewed him. They're not inviting his union, the Amazon Labor Union, anymore because he decided not to endorse any of the Democrat candidates. So now they don't get invited to those events. So let me be very clear what Krystal is doing. When she tells you to focus on the labor, I want you to know that those labor organizations are tied to the Democratic Party. That's how they get a spot in the room. If you're not willing to endorse any of those Democrat candidates, you don't have a spot in the room. This is important for people to understand and fully grasp. Thus, that's her way of still keeping you in the Democratic Party.
Yeah, fair. But then it's about strategy too. I think Jill Stein was the one operating in the way that she's supposed to. Which is, I'm trying to win votes. The AOC one is a negative one of like, no, you shouldn't, because this is, and in general, I think that comes back to voter shaming.
Yeah,
I think voter shaming is bad. I think especially in a democratic system.
It's bad, and I think it's counterproductive.
Yes, yeah, oh yeah.
But there is also a lot of voter shaming that goes in the other direction, not from Jill Stein, but of people who are weighing this calculation and in the balance want to vote for Kamala Harris.
Mm-hmm.
There is a lot of voter shaming at them as well.
Well, fair enough. Well, that's kind of stupid too.
Yeah.
Look, shaming people because of how they vote is dumb, very counterproductive, and historically does not work. It makes people dig in even more. And in general, you're just not, somebody asked a question recently and they were like, should news commentators have to disclose who they vote for? And it actually made me realize, I'm like, who you vote for actually does not tell you all that much interesting stuff about you. For example,
and we'll stop there because now I want to go through the timeline because I think this is important. Now, it's not particularly a harsh episode, but that part right there is very important. And I want you to understand how people will walk a fine line so that they can still maintain access. We're going to go through this timeline here, and I'm going to show you what I mean by that, because I want you to understand why what's being said is being said. Let's pull this up here. Let's go through the timeline. This is the Bernie to Kamala Harris timeline. Because I want you guys to understand that people, particularly in the space that came from that Bernie movement, you got to understand that they have a certain mission here. Let me pull this up here. And I'll make it bigger for you because it's tiny when we use the window zoom. Okay. We are going to dive into this. I'm going to walk you through this because I'm going to try to tell you what has happened. First and foremost, for the people who were a part of that Bernie Sanders wave, that Bernie Sanders movement, this includes those that were there 2016 or 2020 or in between those timelines. If you were a part of that Bernie Sanders movement starting in 2016, like someone like Kyle was, you benefited from Bernie Sanders running for president 2 election cycles in a row. And when I say benefited, you were able to grow your brand and you were able to make a lot of money. That's just the reality. It is what it is. I did not start during that wave. So for me, it was different. Now, let's walk through the timeline. You had the Bernie campaign wave for progressive / populist media. And again, that went on 2 election cycles in a row. However, Bernie lost in 2020, right? In the Democrat primary, even though he was more popular in 2020. Joe Biden ends up winning in the general election against Donald Trump. I remember, even with Kyle, because Krystal and Kyle, they a pair and they doing this together. Kyle said he did not vote for Joe Biden. He couldn't do it because Joe Biden voted for and supported the Iraq war. This is very important, and hold on to that piece. It'll make sense when we get to the Kamala Harris part. So the problem that you ran into then, because Trump didn't win, so you couldn't make money off of trash Trump all the time, those videos. Biden was the winner. And Bernie Sanders decided not to run again for a third time for 2024. So you had to find someone to replace that Bernie Sanders spot to be that progressive candidate that could bring that same energy that Bernie did. If you remember on Krystal, Kyle and Friends, Kyle Kulinski said to Marianne's face, he said, I asked you to run. I wanted you to run. So Kyle Kulinski then asked Marianne Williamson to run for president for 2024. So Marianne Williamson was supposed to be the progressive presidential candidate to replace Bernie Sanders. But there were a couple of problems with that. And let's get into this here. Number one, you had a Democrat that was in the White House. That was different when Bernie ran. Number two, media blackout for Marianne, even though she was running the Democratic Party, because Biden was already in the White House and he was a Democrat, the media didn't really want to talk to her because they said Joe Biden's going to be the nominee. That goes for Dean Phillips too and RFK when he was running as a Dem. Number three, there were no Democrat primary debates because the DNC decided not to have any. Number 4, Marianne, unfortunately, was not as exciting as Bernie Sanders. When we talk about the candidates, she didn't garner as much energy as Bernie Sanders did. It's just a reality. She did not have that same type of enthusiasm among the people. And then number 3, her foreign policy positions weren't good. Whether it was Ukraine, whether it was Israel, these were things that she got a lot of pushback on, but she did not have the same type of energy that Bernie Sanders had. So this was a problem, right? Do you see what I'm doing? They had to try to find another progressive person to run in that Bernie spot. This is what is supposed to help keep the progressive brand going for them, at least. But Marianne did not turn out to be a good candidate. Fast forward, we have the war in Ukraine with foreign policy, and you have October 7th leading us into the genocide. So now we have 2 foreign policy issues that were not front and center during the times when Bernie Sanders ran for president. So this is very important. When Bernie ran, there was no war with Ukraine. When Bernie ran, there wasn't the October 7th genocide. When Bernie ran, Trump was in the White House the second time. When Bernie ran in 2016, Trump wasn't in the White House, but Trump was on his way to the White House. Does everybody see what I'm saying? So the foreign policy changes. Then Marianne Williamson dropped out. After the Dem primary race, she dropped out. Then at one point she decided to re-enter again. She decided to come back and then she dropped out or whatever. But anyway, the first time that she dropped out, Krystal and Kyle then decide that because of the genocide, they're not going to support Joe Biden. Rightfully so. Rightfully so. Then the next thing you know, and I'll never forget this, Krystal and Kyle endorsed Jill Stein. I just showed you the video of Krystal saying she was going to vote for Jill Stein. Jill Stein was on Kyle and Friends. Kyle came on to send the video to Jill Stein's show saying that he supports her, etc. This was right after Jill Stein was starting to get a lot of media attention because Jill Stein was at the protest and she was arrested and the police officer was trying to hit her with the bike, right? Biden drops out and endorses Kamala. Next thing you know, Krystal and Kyle jump on board for Kamala Harris. Now, this was after they had endorsed Jill Stein. This was after Krystal said she was going to vote for Jill Stein. Now, this is where you see a big shift. And this is what I said before. I told people back then, don't buy this. As we get closer to the election, they're going to tell you to vote them. They're going to go back to the Democratic Party. And I was right. I was right. Then people were like, would she be progressive or not? Kamala Harris selects Tim Walz as her VP pick instead of Josh Shapiro. And people are like, yeah, this guy's done a lot of progressive things in Minnesota. So then next thing you know, a lot of other people in progressive media who had talked about the genocide for so long, they jump on board too. They're really excited and pumped about this. And everybody's like coconuts and all that jazz, right? Forgetting to mention some of the things that Tim Walz did to indigenous communities, which I thought were important. So I reported on where he stood on some of the environmental issues, some of the things that he did that was not good. So there's that. Then we found out that Kamala was just as bad on Israel as Biden, that she didn't want to refuse the weapons, etc., as you continue to hear her say. On top of that, she gets the endorsement and promotes and is happy about getting endorsement from Dick Cheney. She brags about Goldman Sachs. This is on the debate stage, right? So as you see, as we go down the line, she is against Medicare for all. She had flipped on that before. And then she flips again on fracking. So she's not progressive if you look at the litmus test for what it means to be a progressive. Now I want to remind you of something. Right up here, when Biden won, Kyle Kulinski made a video saying that he did not vote for Biden due to the Iraq war. Now, all these things that I just told you that came out about Kamala Harris, the Dick Cheney, the Goldman Sachs, the fracking, the Medicare for all, and Kyle wants to happily support and promote Kamala Harris. So let me make this make sense. You couldn't support or vote for Joe Biden because he voted for the Iraq war, but you can now support and push Kamala Harris, who is running to the right of Bernie Sanders, and she's backed by Dick Cheney, Goldman Sachs, and wants to continue to send weapons to Israel. Does everybody see what has happened? The candidate that these so-called progressive media commentators have been pushing, the candidate they are now pushing is to the right of Bernie Sanders, a full-on neocon who stood on the debate stage and told people that we will be a lethal force. And then we'll round it up with this part. Then Jill Stein has a surge among Muslim voters, particularly in the swing states. So they sending everybody after Mehdi Hassan, Breakfast Club, all the attack dogs, AOC trying to sick her down. Again, for someone who people claim this campaign is so unserious, you sure are spending a lot of time attacking a campaign that you think is so unserious, boo. This is the most support that I've seen for the Green Party, I would say, as long as I've been past 10 years. And then we get to the aspect of the brand. And this is what people really have to understand. When you look at Breaking Points, you have to remember that Breaking Points is a show that has a right populist point of view and a left populist point of view. Krystal represents the left populism. Saga represents the right populism. Saga's Republican, Krystal's Democrat. They have what, the blue B and the red P. If Krystal were to decide to tell her audience, that's it, it's enough, we can't continue to try to do this to the Democratic Party anymore, we need to try to build a third party movement, and I'm willing to help and assist the Green Party or any third party in making that happen, then the show changes. And if the show changes, then that can affect their brand, because the show is right populism and left populism, Republican and Democrat. So if Krystal, as the left populist lane, decides to tell people not to participate in the Democratic Party anymore, that changes the show. And that could affect some of their audience. And some of the audience members may not like that because they want to hear a Republican and a Democrat, etc. This is just the facts, guys. It's just the reality. The majority of channels are not telling you to be post-duopoly. The majority of people in political commentary are telling you to be a Democrat or a Republican. So what people have to understand is that it is a brand. This is why, if you notice, Krystal will push back on the Democratic Party. She will criticize Kamala. She will criticize the Democratic Party, but she'll never tell you to leave it. She'll keep you in the system because that is the brand. And that's what people have to understand. It is a brand. They no longer work for Rising, which was corporate media where they were pretty much employees. This is their business, their brand. And from looking on the outside, it seems like a great idea. It's right, because it's like you got both points represented. You got the left populism and right populism represented. Problem that you run into, though, was 2024. Because I don't think anyone could have predicted some of the things that have happened and how bad it has been. We all knew Joe Biden was struggling, but let's just keep it real. So October 7th, the genocide, that changes things because the party in power is the Democrats, not the Republicans. It was easier for people to call out, George Floyd and promote like the George Floyd protests. Trump was in office. It was easier for Dems to do that. It's harder to do it if you're a Democrat and the administration is the Democratic Party. Now you got to really come after your own party. like I said, she's giving criticism there, but they'll never tell you to leave it. They'll never tell you to leave the system because their brand relies on it and access. Because the reality is, if she wants to have access to certain politicians in DC, and remember, Krystal did run for Congress, that means that you have to give some leeway to the Democratic Party. The only one that'll come on and get punched in the face is Ro Khanna. Ro Khanna will go onto any show, whether it's big or small, and he'll take all kind of hits. He came on my show. I was not nice. Not nice. But if you want to continue to have access to other politicians in DC, where they can come into your studio when they are in the DC area, they can come into your studio in person and sit down, and you want to be the new mainstream news, you are going to have to maintain access to people in Congress in DC. And in order to do that, if you're telling people, screw the Democratic Party, leave the Democratic Party, most of those politicians are not going to be willing to come onto your show and talk to you. This is why they have Brian Grimm there as well. He was the DC bureau chief. He had access to the squad. He sat down with them and wrote a whole book about them, boo. A lot of times it's all about access and building and growing your brand. And they know that there is less money in telling people to leave the duopoly, even though they know it is the right thing to do based on the genocide alone. They know Jill Stein has the left platform. They know Jill Stein has the platform that progressives should rally themselves around, but that don't make any money for them. Then you got this. Look at this. Jill Stein is on the cover of the Arab American News in Dearborn, Michigan. Dearborn, Michigan. Hello. Look who's in the center. Not Kamala. Not Trump. Look who is in the center. Jill Stein is in the center. You can't ignore this. I've never seen this before with a Green Party candidate. And then you have this. And they're not excluding people. Even Butch made this video where he's trying to tell Trump supporters, hey, you should leave Team Red and come to Team Green. He's telling people red says stop, green means go. So they're open, they're talking to everybody. Listen to this. And Notori, I saw your comment.
All right, so this is a message for the Trump supporters. Are y'all tired of being called racists? Because I would be. I know that Trump is a racist, and there's a lot of white supremacists that side with that party, but I don't believe by a long shot that most of you guys are racist. But I think if you guys realize that there's no moral difference between crooked Democrats and crooked Republicans, and all other things being equal, you'd rather pay less in taxes. What if I told you Dr. Jill Stein and I can cut your personal income taxes and your small business taxes with 2 simple steps? By making the wealthiest corporations pay their share and breaking up the monopolies so that your small business can compete better and then you can pay a lower tax rate because they're paying their share. And we stop taking money out of your personal income taxes, taking money out of your pocket and handing it to Raytheon, Lockheed Martin, and Boeing to blow people up in their sleep in other countries. Stop sending American kids to go die in foreign wars for gas and for oil. And with the $1 trillion a year we save, we can cut your personal income taxes. Does that sound pretty good to you guys? Because it sounds damn good to me as a small business owner. I'm tired of Uncle Sam taking the cut off the top to go murder other people's kids. I know they go over there on Team Red are only there because it's good for your bottom line. Leave Trump behind. Rock with the Green Party. Peace.
So that's him talking to Trump supporters. And he said, how about if I told you that we cut these defense budget and that can help us cut these taxes that you have, your personal tax. How about if I told you that? Right? So there's no compare. I'm sorry, but I've looked at so many platforms. I've interviewed a number of candidates on the show. And like I said, Krystal and them, they know. When you look at Jill's campaign, it's similar to Bernie's, but better. Bernie didn't have a black agenda on his platform. Bernie didn't have a reparations plan on his platform. Hello? She took it a step further. That is the platform that people should rally behind. And if they weren't worried about growing their brand and maintaining access with some of the people that they have in DC and going on to Bill Maher or trying to be cool with people part of the Breakfast Club, if they weren't worried about the access and all that shit, they would tell you to do the right thing. And once upon a time, they did tell people to do the right thing. So you know what changed? This was her sending a message to the Democratic Party.
There's a lot of cult members. There's a lot of cult members on this panel. Yeah. I mean, one thing I would say to Harry.
Yeah, Dave.
One thing I would say to Harry is, listen, I'm not in the cult. I already wasn't voting for Joe Biden because of the genocide in Gaza. I'm voting for Dr. Jill Stein.
See, 2 months ago, I'm voting for Dr. Jill Stein. And yeah, sometimes people can change their mind. But how do you go from I'm supporting the Democratic Party to I'm jumping out of this system and I'm going to support third party, and you go back to the Democratic Party? That's fucking low. I never believed this when she said it. I told you guys that was her way of sending a message to the Democratic Party. Just like when she talks about the genocide with Kamala Harris, she is sending a message to Kamala Harris. Don't get it twisted. Don't assume that politicians in DC are not watching Breaking Points. They are. Or if they're not, their staff members are. This show has over 1 million subscribers. They are sending a message saying that they're supporting Jill Stein. That was sending a message to the Democratic Party. Change the stance. Get rid of Biden. And once they got rid of Biden, they jumped right back in. Don't ever let people try to smooth talk their way through genocide. Don't ever let somebody say to you, there is no one right way. The one right answer is not to reward genocide. That is the simplest thing that you can do. And that doesn't mean support Trump. Even if you want to sit at home, I don't give a damn. I'm not going to be with you in the damn voting booth. But the reality is I would never sit here and tell my audience that there's no one right thing to do when it comes to genocide. There is a right thing to do. You don't reward it. And that is my message to all of you. Since I do have overlap of an audience with Breaking Points, a viewer sent this to me and said, I need to let people know that this is not okay. So I wanted to address it because I do not want you to ever think that there's nothing to be done, especially when it comes to genocide.